Hey, what's going on, everybody? How's it going? How you doing? Welcome back. So for today's video, apparently, Frank Grillo strikes again. We're talking about a movie called Into the Ashes. And the reason why I watched this movie in particular is because there's a podcast that I listen to fairly frequently, and Frank Grillo was a guest on it. And he was there promoting this movie, and he sounded really excited and really passionate about it, but after a certain point, he started to talk about how critics weren't really receiving it very well. So I just assumed that he made a bad movie and was just lashing out at critics as an excuse, and he was throwing out budgetary things. It sounded like he was just trying to make up reasons why it wasn't great. But after watching this movie, I actually am kind of on his side now. I totally get it, because it's really not a bad movie. It's not a great movie, but there's a subtlety to, the craft that was put into it. There was just a couple things that could have used improvement. But I don't think this movie is as bad as, getting less than 30% or whatever it was on Rotten Tomatoes. That's just ridiculous. I'm not going to tell you the overall plot of the movie. I'm just going to tell you the opening first couple of minutes. It mostly centers around one character who just kind of lives in a small town. He's got a wife. He's got a job. He just seems like your everyday guy. Meanwhile, simultaneously, Frank Grillo is across town, and he just got out of jail, which is very quickly followed by a scene of him shaking somebody down to get an address. And in those first couple minutes, if you're really paying attention, you'll notice that Frank Grillo, he has a tattoo on his hand. And if you're paying attention even more closely, then you'll notice that the other main character, the normal everyday guy, also has a tattoo on his hand. It's not the same tattoo, but it's a very similar style. And the movie's essentially a crime thriller with a little bit of revenge sprinkled on top, so I'll let you figure out the rest. But the treatment that this movie is getting, you would think that it is like some straight-to-DVD Bruce Willis action movie or something. And it's a little weird that, because Frank Grillo's production company kind of put this movie together, and he also did Point Blank and Wheelman, which are two movies that are very underrated that are on Netflix. So knowing that, I would have figured that this movie maybe would have showed up there, but I guess not. But at any rate, I thought the movie was pretty decent. It does have a very slow pace to it. That being said, I was getting a lot of vibes, or a lot of shades, if you will, of Hell or High Water, or a Wind River type scenario, because you can really tell that the majority of the characters in this movie, they're not giving you as much information as they could be giving you. It's like they all have a story to tell, but they're all too manly to give it up, you know? And aside from one or two characters, I thought the acting was really solid. Frank Grillo's the bad guy. He plays his usual self. He's good. And also the lead guy, I think his name is Luke Grimes. He does a pretty good job. The only other name you might recognize is James Badge Dale. He was in The Pacific on HBO, and he's been in a bunch of other stuff. The chemistry that those two characters had together was actually really good, and it made me give a shit about what was going to happen to them throughout the movie. There was one character that looked like he was just like a wannabe pirate or something. I could have done without his snarky bullshit attitude. Also, another thing that was incredibly solid was the music in this movie. It was very muted, and it wasn't in your face, except for maybe one or two moments. To be fair, there was one or two moments where I felt like if they would have just gone with silence and no music, it probably would have been better. But definitely, by and large, as far as the style of music that they chose, it's this very low, synthy kind of sound. I thought it was really good. And as for some of the other negatives, I would say they could have shaved off another 2 or 3 minutes of external shots or establishing shots. They didn't hurt the movie necessarily, but since the movie's so slow, it could have tightened the movie up and made it feel like it was going by a little faster. Also, a couple things could have been exposited a little bit better, the whole hand tattoo thing. The movie, you really had to be paying attention. The movie could have made it slightly more apparent, in my opinion. And I thought the third act could have used a little bit of work. Honestly, if I was Frank Grillo, I would have gone to Netflix, tried to sell this to them, but maybe said, hey, can I get another $50,000 to help with the third act sequence? That's what I would have done. Because again, the third act, it wasn't bad. It was just kind of shoddily put together. You could tell that there might have been a couple things missing. And also, Frank Grillo's character kind of acted a little bit funky towards the end of the movie. It wasn't he was doing a bad job at acting necessarily, but just the way the character was laid out, it got a little weird. But I did like the end of the movie, just the way that everything wrapped up. The one thing about it, though, is I wish the movie would have ended about a minute to a minute and a half sooner, because the movie ends there's a few questions that are unanswered, I guess. But that last minute and a half of the movie, it felt like the movie was thinking just a little bit too much, and it could have just shaved that off, because sometimes less is more. It does have the slight stench of being kind of a discount No Country for Old Men, and I say that because the movie will show you two things, and that it expects you to kind of imagine how those two things come together. But they could have done a slightly better job visually of showing you as an audience the connection between two things, whatever those two things may be. But anyway, overall, I had a pretty positive experience watching this movie. I don't understand why it's getting so much hate, but it does have some flaws, so I'm gonna knock it down a little bit. So I think for a score out of 10, I think I'm gonna give it a 7.4. The cast and crew did a good job. There's definitely some potential there. They did have some flaws, but I feel like if they could have asked for just a little bit more money, they could have done some reshoots and maybe shored up some of the stuff that they didn't do perfectly. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Have you heard of this movie? Do you like Frank Grillo? Hop in the comments. Let me know what's up. Other than that, if you like this review, give me a like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, do all that other happy horse shit, and I will catch you guys next time.